Chapter 1: The Surface Breaks. The ocean was quiet now. No screams, no fire, no sirens. Only the hush of the tide licking the sand, as if the sea wanted to pretend it hadn't just swallowed half a ship and everyone on it. Martin lay half buried at the edge of the beach, a dark shape in the pale morning light. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, soaked and clinging to his ribs. A sharp piece of coral had torn his palm open. He didn't know that yet. His knees were scraped raw. Salt crusted his lashes. When he coughed, it sounded like something dying. Then he breathed in too fast, too much. The second cough came harder. He rolled to his side and retched up seawater, gasping for air between sobs that weren't really sobs, just his lungs trying to remember how to work. The sun hadn't fully risen. It painted the ocean with dull amber, the kind that made everything look like a dream or a hallucination. Martin crawled forward, his nails digging into the wet sand. Each movement was sluggish, heavy. His body hadn't gotten the memo that it had survived. His last memory was of screams, glass, dark water swallowing light, then silence. Now just the scrape of his fingers across shell fragments and something sharp stabbing into his knee. He collapsed again, chest heaving. That was when Colt saw him. Colt had already swept this section of the beach once that morning, found a few bodies, some luggage, a life vest with no one inside it. He wasn't expecting to find anyone else, but there he was, curled, gasping, trembling like a wounded animal. Colt jogged over, squatted down. His own limbs were sore, bruises already blooming across his ribs, but he reached out, pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck. Weak pulse. But there, alive. "Hey," Colt rasped, shaking him gently by the shoulder. "You with me?" Martin flinched at the touch, eyes flying open, wild and unfocused. He tried to scramble back, but his arm gave out. His pupils were too wide, breath too fast. "Easy," Colt said. Not soft, but firm, grounding. "You're safe." Martin stared, then whispered hoarsely, "Where?" "Beach," Colt replied. "We were on the cruise, you remember?" Martin nodded, barely. His eyes were full of panic. "The ship, it went down," Colt said, standing. "You can walk?" Martin tried, his legs folded beneath him. "Didn't think so." Colt slung the man's arm over his shoulder, bracing him with practiced ease. "Let's move before the tide takes anything else." Martin didn't speak after that, just leaned against him, dazed and shivering. They walked inland. The forest was thick but not impenetrable, tropical, hot. Vines coiled around the trees like snakes. Colt scanned the area as they moved, always alert, always assessing. Something military never leaves you, the constant threat calculus ticking in your brain. About a mile in, they found it. A watchtower. Concrete and rusted steel, half sunk into the earth and swallowed by vines. One of those Cold War relics you never think you'll see unless it's in a movie. But it had 4 walls, a roof, high ground, no signs of wild animals inside. It was good enough. Colt helped Martin sit on a broken crate. "Stay," he said, then ducked out and returned moments later with a busted coconut. He cracked it open with a rock, then passed it over. Martin hesitated before drinking. His hands trembled so much he spilled half of it down his front. Colt didn't say anything, just crouched and started examining his foot. There was a splinter of something dark, metal, coral, embedded just under the skin. Martin winced. "Sorry," Colt muttered. "This has to come out." He dug through the salvage from earlier. A metal casing, a rusted screwdriver, a first aid kit with half the contents ruined, but alcohol wipes intact. He sterilized the blade and dug it out in silence. Martin flinched but didn't cry out. When it was done, Colt sat back, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Thanks," Martin whispered. "You're lucky I found you when I did," Colt said flatly, but not unkindly. "You were half under." "I didn't think." Martin looked at his hands, shaking. "I thought I was going to drown." Colt didn't reply, just nodded once. Silence stretched between them like something solid. Then Martin said, "You military?" Colt blinked. "Was? You?" Martin gave a small, bitter laugh. "Editor. I make travel documentaries. The cruise was a company thing. Not much of a vacation." "No." Martin looked down. "Not much." They stayed in the tower for the day. There was no cell service. The radio was busted. Colt tore it apart anyway, fiddling with the insides, but it might as well have been a brick. Outside, the sun blazed over the canopy. Inside, the shadows grew longer. By nightfall, they had a fire going in a makeshift pit outside the door. The smoke kept most of the bugs away. Colt had rigged up a tarp from some emergency gear he'd found washed ashore earlier, at least enough to keep them mostly dry if the air turned. Martin didn't eat much, just sat curled near the wall, knees pulled to his chest, staring at the flickering flame. Colt checked the perimeter. Twice. On the third round, he returned to find Martin gripping the fabric of his pant leg. "I can't," Martin whispered. "I can't go back near the water." "I wasn't asking you to," Colt said. Martin took a shaky breath. "There's something wrong with me. I almost didn't swim. I just froze. I always freeze." Colt crouched. "You're still breathing. That's enough." Martin looked up. "You say that like it's easy." Colt's expression didn't change. "It's not. But you did it." That seemed to quiet Martin, a little. They bedded down on opposite sides of the tower, each with a blanket salvaged from the wreck. The fire outside crackled and hissed. Martin lay curled against the wall, eyes open, haunted. Sometime after midnight, a scream broke the silence, sharp and panicked. Colt sat up instantly. Martin was thrashing, caught in a nightmare, gasping for air like he was drowning all over again. His hands clawed at his throat. Colt moved fast, kneeling beside him, pressing a firm hand to his chest. Martin, it's not real. You're here. You're on land." Martin blinked awake, face wet. His whole body was trembling. He didn't speak, just let out a soft whimper like something deep inside him had cracked. Colt stayed kneeling, unsure. Then, without a word, he sat down beside Martin and didn't move back. Didn't touch him. Didn't crowd him. But close. Just close enough that if Martin reached out, he could touch his arm. Just enough that his breathing could match Colt's. Eventually it did. Martin fell asleep again, slower this time, steadier. Colt sat awake a while longer, listening to the fire, to the forest, to the quiet breaths of a man who, just hours ago, had been drowning, and now clung to life like it was a fragile thread wrapped around someone else's wrist. Colt didn't sleep far after that, just a few inches away, and in the morning, maybe closer still. Chapter 2, we learn in silence. The sun rose and the days began to blur. In the early light, Martin watched Colt crouch near the tree line, tying together a crude snare trap made of vine and bent wire scavenged from the wreckage. His hands moved with muscle memory, no hesitation, no wasted motion. Martin tried to imitate him, fumbling with the knots, the angles. He got it wrong 3 times before Colt gave a sharp shake of his head and silently retied it for him. Still, Martin kept trying. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Everything they did now was stripped to necessity: water, food, fire, shelter, and the steady rebuilding of something they'd both lost: control. Martin followed him through the brush, learning to step where Colt stepped, duck when Colt ducked. The forest buzzed with life. They tracked birds by the movement of leaves, learned the difference between edible berries and the ones that would put you on your back vomiting. Colt pointed things out, sometimes with a grunt, sometimes with a short, clipped word, and Martin absorbed it all like a sponge. That night, back at the watchtower, Colt unwrapped his boots and hissed. His heels were raw, blisters burst and torn from walking barefoot on coral and heat-slicked stone. Martin knelt beside him, wordless, and fetched the first aid kit. He cleaned the wounds with careful hands. The alcohol stung, and Colt didn't flinch, but Martin's fingers lingered longer than they needed to, bandaging with quiet precision. He didn't say thank you. Colt didn't say you're welcome. But when Martin handed him the canteen afterward, Colt took it and met his eyes for half a second longer than usual. That was enough. They ventured farther inland on the 4th day, following a faint path through thick undergrowth. Colt thought he saw fencing in the distance. Not much hope for rescue yet. No planes, no boats, just heat and noise. But there was a reason this island had a watchtower. Someone had been here once. Maybe there was more left. They found it hidden under vines and moss, a half-collapsed military bunker, reinforced concrete split at the corner like a cracked egg. Inside, the smell was sharp: rust, mold, damp metal. Martin stepped in cautiously. The roof had caved on one side and moss grew thick along the walls, but they found a crate of rusted supplies. Most of it was useless: rotted uniforms, a disintegrated mattress. But in the far back, beneath a pile of debris, Martin unearthed a stash of canned rations and something else: a dented but intact water filtration kit, sealed in a military-grade container. He turned to Colt, eyes wide. "This could last us a month. Longer, if we ration." Martin pulled the supplies into the cleaner half of the bunker and immediately started organizing them, lining the cans up by expiration date, sorting tools, counting water packets aloud under his breath. He cleaned a corner of the floor with a piece of cloth until it shone dull gray. It became their new base. Colt let him. It was on the 6th day that they fought. Colt returned from a short hunt with a dead bird in hand. He held it by the legs, feathers still damp with sweat and blood. It wasn't large, just enough for a small meal, but when he laid it on the crate they used as a table, Martin froze. "What the hell is that?" Martin said, voice sharp. Colt raised a brow. "Dinner." Martin's hands clenched. "You didn't have to kill it like that. You snapped its neck." Colt looked tired. "Quickest way." Martin stepped back like he'd been struck. "God, is there anything in you that isn't brutal?" That made Colt pause. "You want to live," he said evenly, "or die with morals?" Martin flinched. His throat worked. "That's not. You don't have to eat it," Colt muttered, turning away. "Starve if you want." The silence that followed was heavier than anything since the wreck. Martin left the bunker and walked until he couldn't see the firelight anymore. He sat on a rock, head in his hands, and cried, not over the bird, not even over Colt, just everything. The ship, the silence, the clawing dread that this might be their life now, that they might never be found. He cried because he hated the part of him that wanted to eat the damn bird. Hated that part of him was starting to like sleeping near Colt, like it was safe. When he returned hours later, the bird had been cooked over the fire. Colt was sitting outside the bunker, knees up, arms resting across them. Without a word, he handed Martin half of it. Martin stared at it, then at Colt. The meat was warm, crispy at the edge. He took it, ate. Didn't say thank you, didn't need to. That night, they slept in the bunker. The floor was still hard, but it was clean, and the air was cooler. Martin laid down first, wrapping himself in one of the old blankets they dried under the sun. Colt followed, his bedroll a few feet away. It should have felt like distance, but as the night deepened and the fire dwindled to embers, they shifted. Martin rolled onto his side, facing the wall. Somewhere behind him, Colt exhaled. Their backs nearly touched. Then, accidentally maybe, Colt's arm brushed Martin's shoulder. Martin didn't move, neither did Colt. Sleep came easier than it should have. Morning broke soft and gold. Martin woke first, stretching carefully. He blinked, adjusting to the new light filtering through the bunker cracks. Colt was still asleep beside him, one arm draped loosely across his waist, not in a possessive way, just resting there. His breath was steady, quiet. Martin's heart ached, not from fear, from something else. He sat up gently, careful not to wake him. Then he noticed Colt's arm where the blanket had slipped down. The tattoo on his side, curling around his ribcage, half faded but unmistakably military. Lines of ink and memory. Beneath it, the skin was sunburned, peeling. Martin stood, found one of the cloth strips they hadn't used yet, and wrapped the tattoo in cool fabric, shielding it from the sun. His fingers moved with care, not urgency. Colt stirred but didn't wake. Martin sat down again, close but not touching. He didn't say thank you. Colt wouldn't have known what to do with it anyway. But he stayed. And Colt, he stayed too. Chapter 3, he laughed today. The forest didn't change, but something between them had. It was subtle at first, how Colt handed over the better half of the fruit without grunting, how Martin began humming under his breath when sorting their supplies, voice just above a whisper. They moved like practiced partners now, rarely needing to speak but always in sync. Martin noticed the quiet shift in Colt most when the silence wasn't as heavy. It didn't feel like a wall anymore. Just space, breathing room. Time. They were gathering berries near the southern ridge that morning. Tiny, red-purple ones that Colt had confirmed weren't poisonous, though they were tart enough to make Martin flinch every time. Colt knelt in the bush, focused on plucking them efficiently, brows furrowed. Martin, just behind him, watched with narrowed eyes, lips twitching. Then, dramatically, pointedly, Martin dropped his shoulders, set his jaw, and squinted into the distance with a painfully serious face that was a near-perfect replica of Colt's usual expression. He didn't say anything, just stood like that. Colt glanced over, caught the pose, and froze. Martin held the stare, full committed. Colt stared, then blinked. Then, just barely, his lips twitched. The smirk came like a ripple in still water. Martin grinned back. "There it is," he said softly. Colt shook his head. "You're an idiot." Martin beamed. "Yeah, but I'm your idiot now, aren't I?" Colt turned back to the bush. but he was still smiling. They found the fishing boat 2 hours later, resting at the edge of the reef like some mythic skeleton half-eaten by the tide. The hull was mostly intact, though it listed dangerously to one side. Coral grew between the slats. The sail was missing. Ropes dangled, frayed and tangled with seaweed. To Colt, it was a graveyard. To Martin, it was hope. "We could fix it," Martin said immediately, circling it like it might come back to life if he just believed hard enough. Colt didn't even look at it. "No engine, no sail, barely floats. But it's something," Martin said too quickly. "Something human, something left behind. That matters." Colt crossed his arms. "It's junk." Martin ran a hand over the wood. "It's hope." They stared at each other. Colt exhaled. "Fine. You want to drag a broken dream back to camp. I'll help." Martin grinned. "Thank you." Colt didn't respond, but he didn't walk away either. The shallows near the reef were clear and warm, water lapping at their calves. Small fish darted between their legs. Colt rolled his shoulders and turned to Martin, who was already looking at the waves like they were about to eat him. Martin stood knee-deep, frozen. "You said you wanted to try," Colt said, voice low. Martin's jaw tightened. "I know. I won't push you." Martin's hands clenched and unclenched. "Just don't let go." Colt stepped into the water slowly, closing the distance. "I won't." He extended a hand. Martin took it. They moved into the waist-deep part, where the tide tugged gently but didn't pull. Colt positioned himself behind Martin, hands at his waist, voice near his ear. "Try to float. Just trust the water. I've got you." Martin tried. He failed. The second his feet left the seafloor, his breathing hitched, and he latched onto Colt's shoulders like a lifeline. Colt caught him easily, strong arms wrapping around his chest, holding him up. Martin buried his face against Colt's neck, shaking. "I can't," he whispered. "You can. I'll drown." "You're not in the ocean," Colt murmured. "You're in me right now, and I don't sink." Martin's fingers dug into his back. "Don't let go." "I won't." There was no more swimming that day, but Martin didn't move away from him, and Colt didn't mind. That night, they camped near a shallow cave overlooking the sea. It had a roof of stone and just enough room for a fire. Safe, warm, tucked away from the world. Martin leaned against the cave wall, freshly dried after their attempt at swimming. He wore Colt's spare shirt, too big on him, the sleeves swallowing his hands, and sipped warm broth from a tin. They ate in silence, but it wasn't heavy. It was full, comfortable. Afterward, they watched the fire dance. The air cooled, and Martin shivered under the blanket. Colt noticed. Without a word, he set down his cup and shifted over. Martin didn't flinch when Colt's back pressed against his. Didn't move when Colt's arm curled hesitantly over his waist. Didn't even breathe for a second. Then, slowly, quietly, Martin placed his hand over Colt's, and sleep came easier than it had in weeks. That night, Colt dreamed. Sand, gunfire, blood. A scream just out of range. A comrade with his eyes open, mouth trembling, blood pouring through his hands. Colt pressing down on the wound. Harder, harder. Not enough. "Stay with me. Stay." It always ended the same. Always. He woke with a sharp breath, heart racing, sweat cooling on his chest. And Martin. Martin was right there, curled in front of him, still asleep, still warm, still breathing. Colt clutched him harder, arms locking around his middle like a shield. Martin stirred and made a soft sound, but didn't wake. He just leaned back against him more, his spine pressing to Colt's chest. Colt closed his eyes and breathed in the scent of salt and earth and skin. He didn't sleep the rest of the night, but he didn't let go either. Chapter 4. The Fire in His Voice. The cliffs jutted out over the endless ocean like broken teeth, ancient and unyielding. Wind threaded through the cracks in the stone, whispering secrets from lives long lost. Martin had grown used to walking here, just far enough from the tree line to glimpse the sea, but never too close. He still didn't trust it, maybe never would. It was on one of those walks, just after dawn, when his foot struck something hard and metallic buried in the dirt. He knelt, heart thumping, and cleared away the leaves and gravel with shaking hands. A radio. Half-eaten by rust, but intact. Martin stared, breath stuck in his throat. "Colt!" he shouted, voice breaking from lack of use. Colt appeared from the brush seconds later, barefoot, knife still in hand. "What? Are you?" Martin held up the find with both hands. "It's a radio." They carried it back together, hearts pounding with a rare shared purpose. They set it on the work table inside the bunker, the one Martin insisted on cleaning every morning like a ritual, and examined it under the sliver of sunlight that filtered through the ceiling crack. Colt opened it carefully with his knife, studying the components. Some were rusted, others shockingly intact. He tested the dials. Nothing. "It needs a new fuse," he said, "and a power source." They scavenged the broken tower near the eastern ridge, returning with a bent battery case and a small damaged solar panel. Not ideal. But Martin's hands didn't shake when he held the tools. He hadn't realized how much he missed the feeling of trying to fix something instead of just surviving it. They worked in shifts. Martin took the mornings, carefully untangling wires, cleaning contacts with strips of cloth soaked in vinegar. Colt worked at night, using his steady hands and military memory to rewire broken circuits. They didn't speak much, but something about the project made every moment feel alive again. Hope crackled between them like static. They didn't talk about what would happen if it worked, but they also didn't talk about what would happen if it didn't. It was on the 8th day that it happened. Martin had gone out near the cliffside to gather more cloth from the wreckage lodged in the rocks below. It was a routine climb, a ledge here, a grip there. He'd done it before, but the moss was slick that day, and his focus was on the horizon, not his footing. One wrong step. His foot slipped. A sharp yell escaped his lips, and then he was tumbling down hard, stones scraping against his back, his head slamming against rock with a sickening crack. The world dimmed, then blinked out. Colt heard the sound and was running before his name even finished echoing in the air. He found Martin crumpled against a boulder, blood trailing from the side of his head, seeping through his curls into the dirt. "Martin?" Colt dropped to his knees, checking his pulse, his breath. Both were shallow, weak. "Come on," Colt muttered, hoisting him into his arms with a grunt. He didn't walk. He ran. Through the forest, over roots and sharp rocks, not feeling any of it. The world narrowed to Martin's unmoving face, pale against Colt's shoulder. Back at the bunker, Colt laid him down on the blanket and tore into the first aid kit. His hands shook. He'd sewn a dozen wounds before. Worse ones, in worse places. But his fingers wouldn't steady. He cleaned the gash on Martin's head, pressed gauze against it to stop the bleeding. The cut was deep, but not fatal, not yet. Colt threaded the needle with trembling hands and stitched slowly, muttering under his breath with every pull of the thread. Come on, breathe, damn it!" When it was over, he sat beside Martin and didn't move. He didn't sleep. Not that night, not the next. He just sat, holding Martin's hand, as if letting go would mean losing him forever. Martin woke to the sound of breathing, close, measured, and a pressure against his hand that grounded him before his eyes even opened. The first thing he saw was Colt's face, drawn, red-eyed, exhausted. Colt wasn't looking at him. He was watching him. The kind of watching that wasn't just checking for signs of life, but something deeper, something desperate. Martin croaked out, "Hey!" Colt's head snapped up. "Jesus Christ!" His voice cracked. "You scared the hell out of me." Martin tried to smile, but it hurt. "I slipped." "No kidding," Colt muttered, wiping a hand down his face. There was silence for a long moment. Then Colt looked at him, really looked. "I thought I lost you," he said quietly. "And it terrified me, in a way war never did." Martin blinked, throat too tight to speak. Colt swallowed hard. "I've held dying men in my arms, friends, brothers, and I knew how to let them go. Knew it was part of the job, but you," he reached up, cupped Martin's face with one calloused palm. "I don't know how to lose you." Martin's eyes burned. He lifted a trembling hand, placing it over Colt's. "You didn't." Their eyes met, and Colt kissed him. Not hungry, not polished, just real. Oppressive mouths that trembled with unspoken fear, grief, and something warm enough to burn. When they pulled apart, Colt stayed close, forehead resting against Martin's. "I've got you." Martin nodded, eyes closed. "I know." That night, they stayed inside the cave again, firelight dancing across the stone walls. Martin was weak, but awake, curled under the blanket as Colt wrapped an arm around his back, anchoring him there. Their second kiss came slower, unfolding like a secret neither of them could keep anymore. Colt leaned down, fingers brushing Martin's jaw, and kissed him again. Longer this time, more certain. Martin sighed into it, hand pressed flat against Colt's chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heart. Colt's own hand slid to Martin's chest, mirroring the touch. "You feel like peace," Colt whispered against his lips. Martin arched into him, exhaling shakily. You feel like home. The blanket fell from their shoulders. Skin met skin. There was no rush, no fumbling, just warmth. A slow unpeeling of walls and fear and time, until all that was left was touch and breath and whispered need. Martin laughed softly when Colt kissed the curve of his neck. Colt grinned, eyes half-lidded. What? Tickles. Good. They moved together in the dark like a tide finally reaching shore. Gentle, real, unhurried. Their bodies found rhythm. Their hearts stayed close. Colt didn't let go. Martin didn't ask him to. And when they finally lay still again, tangled in each other beneath the fire's dying light, it wasn't fear that kept them close. It was love. The bunker smelled like solder and sweat. The radio sat on the center table, its cracked casing held together with twine and hope. They'd rerouted half of its inner workings using salvaged copper wire from a flashlight battery. The solar panel, perched in the clearing outside, flickered green, charging steadily. Martin sat cross-legged beside it, lips moving silently as he adjusted dials. His fingers trembled, not from fear this time, but anticipation, the kind that sits in your throat like static, humming until it has nowhere else to go. Colt stood behind him, arms crossed, watching, quiet. Then, a voice, faint but real. Martin gasped and leaned forward, twisting the knob again. Repeat, if anyone can hear. He grabbed the mic. Hello? Hello, this is Martin Green. There are 2 survivors. We're on a small island. I don't know the coordinates, but the shipwreck was the Violet Horizon. Copy that, Martin. This is Coast Guard Vessel Theta. We've been scanning this region. Stay where you are. We're en route. Martin let the mic drop from his hands. He turned to Colt, eyes wide. We did it, he whispered. Colt nodded slowly. Yeah. Martin threw his arms around him, holding tight. Colt held him back, but when Martin pulled away, his smile radiant, he noticed something. Colt's eyes weren't shining like his. They were shadowed. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Rations packed, supplies organized. The boat would arrive on the far shore, a place they hadn't walked since the first week, where the reef broke into jagged cliffs and the sea opened like a wound. Martin worked with focused joy. He cleaned the cave, folded their blankets, smoothed the earth where they had once slept. Colt sharpened his knife for the 100th time, tied and untied the straps of his pack. He hadn't said much. That night, Martin lay beside him, facing the fire. You're quiet, he murmured. Colt didn't respond at first. Then he said, You ever think about before? Martin blinked. Before the wreck? Colt nodded once. Martin stared into the flame. Sometimes. I had an apartment, cold floors, my kettle leaked. I never bothered fixing it. Colt made a soft sound. Martin turned to look at him. You? Barracks, mostly, Colt said. Then a place above a mechanic shop, too loud, never unpacked. He hesitated. I sent letters, after I got out, to my family, never heard back. Martin's heart ached. He shifted closer. You deserved better. Colt gave a short laugh, empty. It's fine. Easier not to miss something you never had. Martin watched him, voice quiet. What happens when we go back? Colt didn't answer. Martin didn't ask again. The morning of the rescue, the sound of a distant motor echoed across the shore. Martin stood at the edge of the beach, barefoot in the sand, heart pounding like it would break through his ribs. Colt stood behind him, silent. The vessel was small, white, with blue stripes and a Coast Guard insignia on the side. As it approached, a voice called out through a megaphone. Hold tight! You're not hallucinating! Martin laughed, tears stinging his eyes. When the boat docked, 3 officers jumped off. One of them, Juno, a woman with a shock of red hair and a wicked smile, grinned at the 2 of them as they were checked for injuries. Jesus, she said, glancing between them. You 2 look like hell. Martin grinned. You should have seen us 2 weeks ago. Juno leaned in, lowering her voice. You 2? She tilted her head slightly. Martin flushed. Colt unexpectedly said, Yeah. She nodded, then winked. Good. About time someone out here gets a happy ending. They climbed aboard. Martin sat near the edge, knees pulled to his chest, watching the island shrink behind them. Colt stood near the railing, face unreadable, gaze fixed on the horizon. Martin joined him. They stood in silence for a long time. The wind tugged at their shirts, the scent of salt and fuel thick in the air. Then Martin whispered, We're not done, are we? Colt turned to him slowly. His eyes were softer now, less guarded. Not if you don't want to be. Martin smiled. Colt reached out, cupped his jaw gently, and kissed him. On the deck, under the sky, with the whole world watching and the ocean finally behind them, they didn't care. Back in the city, everything moved too fast. They were admitted to a hospital for observation. Medical tests, psych evaluations, crowds, lights, noise. Martin shrank from it. The fluorescent buzz of the hallway lights made his chest tighten. The cold sheets in the hospital bed felt wrong. His ears rang with the absence of waves. No firelight. No Colt breathing beside him. The first night, he didn't sleep. The second, he cried into the hospital pillow, muffling the sound. They were discharged on the third day. Martin was sent back to his apartment. It was just like he remembered: cold tile floors, empty counters, a blinking light on his coffee maker. He stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping inside. The quiet pressed on his ribs. That night, he lay in bed, the blanket tight around him, staring at the wall, and felt alone in a way he hadn't since the ship sank. The knock came just past midnight. Soft, not urgent. Martin opened the door with shaking hands. Colt stood there, backpack slung over one shoulder, jacket half unzipped, rain drying in his hair. He didn't say anything, just walked in, dropped his pack, shrugged off his jacket, and climbed into Martin's bed. He slid under the blanket and curled behind Martin, one arm wrapping tightly around his waist, pressing their bodies flush, just like he always had. Martin closed his eyes. "Colt," he whispered. "I didn't know where else to go," Colt murmured, breath warm against his neck. Martin turned slightly, reaching for his hand. "You're already home." Chapter 6: The Way He Breathes Now. The apartment was small, tucked above a sandwich shop in a neighborhood with more cracked pavement than charm, but Martin loved it. Not because of the view, which was mostly power lines, or the creaky floors that betrayed every midnight trip to the fridge, but because Colt was here. Every morning, sunlight filtered through half-open blinds and landed on the ridiculous glass jar of pickled eggs that Colt insisted on keeping in the fridge. The same jar Martin refused to touch. And every morning, Martin forgot to water the succulent by the windowsill. He swore he'd get better at it. Colt never reminded him. They found their rhythm in the quiet. Colt left for work early, the faint scent of cedar and coffee trailing behind him. He'd taken a job at a veterans outreach center, guiding others through the things he'd once survived alone. He didn't talk about it much, but Martin could see the change. His steps had purpose. His voice had steadied. Martin spent his mornings editing, fingers dancing over keys, voiceovers murmuring in his headphones. He'd turned their survival into a short documentary, Survivors of the Silent Island. He told their story with restraint and honesty, no dramatization, just truth. Colt narrated half of it. They recorded it in the living room, with a blanket tent to muffle the echo, and Martin sitting across from him, watching his lips move around the words. Colt's voice, low, steady, intimate, brought the footage to life. We lived on silence, on instinct, on fire and fear and the shape of each other's breath. Martin had to pause the recording after that one, said it was for sound quality. Colt didn't call him on it. They lived easily now, in a way that still startled Martin sometimes. The way Colt's toothbrush sat beside his. How his combat boots always made the hallway smell like leather and dust. The way they still slept, facing opposite directions at first, backs brushing. But every night, without fail, Colt shifted, curling around Martin's back, arm resting across his waist. Martin never pushed him away. It was on one of those slow mornings, half awake and tangled under the sheets, that Martin murmured, "You ever gonna stop doing that?" Colt stirred behind him, sleepy and warm. "Doing what?" he rasped, voice still thick with sleep. "This." Martin tilted his head toward the arm wrapped around him. "Sneaking up behind me like I'm gonna disappear." A beat. Then Colt pressed a kiss to the back of Martin's neck, soft, lingering. "Why would I?" he whispered. "You're my anchor." Martin turned then, eyes soft, and kissed him full on the mouth, the kind of kiss that didn't chase passion, just rested in love. They planned the trip in secret. No electronics, no GPS, just maps, old hiking boots, and a battered thermos Colt had sworn by since their second week on the island. They went camping, not because they needed to escape anything, but because they wanted to remember, to return. Not to the fear, but to the stillness. To the feeling of waking up under a wide sky with nothing between them and the earth. They pitched a tent near a lake that mirrored the stars at night. Colt built the fire. Martin made the coffee too strong. They didn't care. They lay on their backs, shoulder to shoulder, fingers intertwined. "You think we would have made it if we hadn't washed up together?" Martin asked, voice quiet under the constellations. "No," Colt said honestly. Martin smiled. "Me neither." They didn't speak again for a long while. Just lay there, breathing the same air. That night, Martin crawled into the sleeping bag first. It was cold, crisp air biting against his skin despite the layers. Colt followed, zipping the side and wrapping his arms around Martin automatically. But then, Martin turned, faced him fully, and reached up, gently guiding Colt's head to his chest. Colt froze. "Tonight," Martin whispered, "I hold you." The silence trembled. Then Colt pressed his face into Martin's neck, his voice breaking in the dark. "Only if you promise never to let go." Martin's reply was a kiss to his temple. Warmth bloomed around them, soft breaths, steady hearts, skin against skin. They stayed that way until dawn, wrapped in memory and future and everything in between. And in the hush before morning, Martin listened. To the way Colt breathed now, not with fear, not like he was holding something back, but like he finally believed he was home.